Now, what exactly does Mr. Esther want from Miss Virginia?
Right now, Mr. Esther is having a tremendous amount of difficulty imagining anything he doesn't want from Miss Virginia.
Are you ready for a divorce, Mr. Siegel?
Never.
Wow. My, oh my, you're pretty ferocious where Mom's concerned, aren't you?
Yeah.
The rest of the time, you're just another good-looking, sweet-talking, charm-oozing, fuck-happy fella with nothing to offer but some dialogue. Dialogue's cheap in Hollywood, Ben. Why don't you run outside and jerk yourself a soda?
Well, I would have to see it, of course.
You are seeing it. You're looking right at it.
No one compares to you.
How true.
Pity you ancient stones, those tender princes whom envy has immured within your walls. Rough cradle for such little pretty ones. Rude, ragged nurse, use my babies well.
The trouble is, darling, I'm an incurable romantic. You're everything in the world to me, you know that. I love being with you. I don't want to lose you. I have few friends, real friends, and you're the only person in my life with whom I can be entirely myself.
I love you.
Yeah, go easy on the wine, hon. It's daytime.
Okay, same goes for the micromanaging. Okay.
I see the shapes I remember from maps. I see the shoreline.
You're good. After all these years.
Cheers. Yeah, sometimes I think the only way I'll get any pleasure is by leaning against the washer during the spin cycle. I'm in it for the endorphin rush.
Endorphin.
Whatever.
So, Annette, I don't like to start at the beginning. I want to start with I don't usually also take a question from Wikipedia, let alone my first question. But this is clearly correct. You played Hedda Gabler at the Geffen Playhouse in 1999, right?
That's right.
So the Los Angeles Times, this is the review. Benning uses her vocal instrument to fine effect without throwing it around. In the movies, you don't always hear what Benning can do with that voice, especially when she's playing virtuous, sensible types. But Ibsen's anti-heroine, thwarted sensualist, a woman wrestling with her inner troll, belle of a ball that never comes, is neither virtuous nor sensible. She's no easy-to-read villain either, nor a mere vindictive brat, though plenty of actresses have reduced her thus. Benning lays into the venomous sarcasm mighty heavily, but she's cagey enough to avoid reductive extremes. And that review, which I'm sure you were pleased to get, seems to me to completely encapsulate the kind of actor you are, and not just because you're here, but I think one of the 3 or 4 best working actresses of my lifetime.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Trying to get that in my head. There's no difference.
I don't mind actress. I don't mind
okay.
that. That's okay.
Well, you're both an actress and an actor. So there is something that you find in so many characters. I'm going to compare you to a brief moment to Al Pacino, because everybody loves Al Pacino, but he lives on the edges. And he's good at it. He likes to be extreme. You find this complicated, nuanced middle ground, often repressed, and then there's like in American Beauty, there's this moment that sort of shocks the audience, and I think it's really human. Has that always been your goal or your talent?
Well, thanks. I always think about when if you ask me that question, I think about the writing, because it's the writing that guides us. And Hedda Gabler, I mean, I've always been obsessed with Ibsen. It's sort of one of the reasons I wanted to be an actress, was that period of drama, particularly for women, was so rich, and these brilliant men were writing women in a way they never had, and certainly Ibsen was the first one. And in fact, the one I saved 2 things from that production. One of the things I saved was all of the bullet casings. For those of you that don't know, Hedda, sorry, spoiler, she shoots herself in the head. Well, I assume it's in the head. We don't see her, but I always assumed it was in the head. Yeah, she kills herself. So I have these casings, all these bullet casings in a bowl. Somehow I felt I needed to save those. I don't know. I think that, we find the great writing. We actors try to find the great writing, and then within that try to find ways to stretch as far as possible and to give as much emotional range to the characters as possible. I don't know. We just interpret. So it's all in the writing. And that's why I was really interested in the theater, and why I got interested in acting was because of dramatic literature. And what was there on the page was so rich and so intellectually vibrant, as well as being potentially filled with emotion. So, that's always seemed to make sense to me, to try to find my way in through that.
So you won a Tony, continue in the theater, you won a Tony in the late 80s, right? Coastal Disturbances, is that right?
I was nominated. I didn't win.
I'm going to go ahead and give you a win.
Okay, thanks.
Congratulations.
That feels better.
Yeah.
Winning is better, let me just tell you.
Where do you keep that imaginary Tony? And soon after you go to Hollywood, and I'm curious with the success that you had on the stage, starting when you were young and still back in Kansas, right? When you started acting, right?
We moved from Kansas to California when I was 7. I grew up in San Diego. Yeah. Then I started getting involved in high school and community college and state college, and then kind of went from there.
Yeah, like the San Diego Playhouse, right? Where I think I've seen a couple performances, if I have the name right. I had a friend come out and do a couple things there. Did you, and then you get to New York and you get to Broadway and you get this success. Was there growing up in Southern California, was there a sense always that if you could, you would come out to Hollywood and try to make it in the movies?
Well, being from first San Diego and then San Francisco, both of those places kind of put LA down, oddly. When you're from Southern California, people put LA down. When you're from Northern California, it's like you can't get away from that. So, and I was kind of intimidated, to tell you the truth, by the idea of coming here. I live here now. I live in LA. But so I went to New York to try to I thought if I was doing a play, maybe I could maybe transition into movies that way, which is what ended up happening. So I didn't end up really coming out here until I was working. I made one trip when I was doing repertory theater in San Francisco. I came down and kind of met a few people, I was introduced to a few people, but that didn't really, I mean, my hair was very, very long. I was a theater actress. My teeth were very kind of spaced apart, and I had a chip on my tooth, and all of those kinds of things. That's what people kind of focused on. So anyway, I went to New York, and so I was almost 30 before I started doing movies, which I think that was kind of good for me in a way.
I don't know whether you do. I do now, and I didn't grow up here either. I grew up in, as you probably know, in Washington, D.C. My dad was in politics, and but now that I've been out here, 20 years, and I idealized this place growing up, and I get super defensive with that sort of when people put down LA, and I get why, and there's a way to look at it as as unserious. Certainly my family, even though they had success here, sometimes looked at it as unserious. But like the smartest people I've ever met, most creative people I've ever met, they're here. There's all these great artists. So I get my hair up when people start ripping LA.
No, I'm the same way now. And my kids, we've got 4 kids, and 2 of them live here, and I think both of them feel that way too. And I know I do. The people that I know, the people that are my dear friends, some in my business and many of them in other businesses, I feel the same way. Yeah, there's a real vitality here. I don't think you live here casually. I think most people that are here for a purpose, and that's exciting to be around. I like it.
Yeah, so do I. I want to talk a little bit about success and failure, but let's start with how you handle failure, really, to the extent that you've had it. But success, like the experience of breaking through. You read articles about you, and by the way, there are not many. You break through. It's always her breakout film, The Grifters. And I'm curious whether that is a feeling that you experience, like, oh, something has dramatically changed. I suspect when you get the call that you've been nominated for an Oscar, that changes. But either at the time or immediately after, do you sense, if I play this right, something's going to change in the direction, the course of my career?
It was interesting. I'd made 2 movies. I made a family comedy, and I made a very fancy art film with Milos Forman before that. And both of them had no life. They came out, and even though they couldn't have been more different experiences, The Great Outdoors and Valmont, it was like polar opposite kinds of movies, but neither did well, as they say. And so I had the experience of making movies, which was very new. And I learned so much from that, but I'd never had the next chapter. So when The Grifters happened and came out and it was well regarded, it was just so delightful. Oh, I see. This is what it's like when people are, excited about something. So there was that. And then, the first kind of dealing with being, as you said, nominated and all that came with that. I was just as ambivalent then as I am now, that there's a duality to it. There's a wonderful part of it, and then there's also this other kind of shocking part about becoming a public person, and it's just such a different way to live, and it took some adjusting to. Although, of course, it's a wonderful thing as an actor. You have more choices, and you have the ability to say no to things that you don't like, and
having searched for work and trying to support myself and struggling for so long, then to feel like, wow, now I can actually have some agency here. That is exciting. And that felt very good, and it was very exciting. And it sort of changed my life, of course, like it does for everybody. And I felt a certain freedom internally too, as a person. I like I said, I wasn't a kid. And so in a way I kind of grew up in a good way, I think.
When you talk about balancing that, the success with the occasional, perhaps frequent downside of being a public person, is that why, and maybe it's just because I did insufficient research here, but is that why there's not, you're not, it's not easy to, I just did an interview with Elliot Gould, a long interview that's going to be on CBS Sunday morning. And Elliot, getting information about Elliot is not challenging. Right? You don't seem to have done many. Is that, and I imagine requests come in to your people, publicists. Do you turn stuff down just because you don't want to, you don't feel like you need to, or am I wrong and there's a ton of them and I just couldn't find them?
Elliot Gould, you just bring him up and just, I flash to Bugsy. He's in the back seat. We're shooting this scene. What a fine actor.
Yeah.
Incredible and very kind guy. Yeah, I have, I like my privacy. And I think that it's a way to stay sane when you have a certain amount of public attention because you're in the business that I'm in. So for me, it's always been a kind of natural thing. Even when I was first approached, when I wasn't known at all and people asked me, oh, do you want to go on Johnny Carson? I remember that's my big memory is Johnny Carson, because I loved Johnny Carson. I watched it as a kid and I was so intimidated and nervous about the idea that I didn't do it. I was like, no, I can't go on Johnny Carson. I mean, and it wasn't because I was known, I was not known. But anyway, so I've always had an ambivalence about it. But there are times that one can use the spotlight in a really productive way. Especially if there's something that's important to you, you want to shine a light on it that isn't about you. That can be very useful. But in terms of my own sanity, I always have kind of erred on the side of being private, but not always. Most of the time though, if I can, I'll avoid. I'll avoid it.
There's one of the articles I found was, I guess, during the probably the awards campaign season for the grifters, and you were meeting some reporter over breakfast or for lunch. And first of all, you'd made your own dress, just this incredible. It said you said that you had made, or they said, maybe they got it wrong.
No, I actually I used to sew quite a bit. I don't remember the dress though. It's funny. I would think I would have remembered it, but I don't.
I like the idea that sitting around sewing, making your own clothes. And then you ordered lunch and you ordered potato salad and a pickle. And I could sense where that was headed. But the reporter was like, who orders potato salad and a pickle for lunch? What Oscar-nominated actress orders potato salad and a pickle?
Well, the best part of that then was that there actually was no campaigning. And I'm really lucky because I had that experience. I mean, that word wasn't even used because it would have been too embarrassing and it would have been so frowned on. But actually, it wasn't even a conversation. That wasn't even a, should you or should you not campaign. It was just that from my point of view, maybe it was because I was just starting, but that was before that. I think it was literally the year before that was when my left foot happened, which was Harvey Weinstein's first entree into, you probably know more about this than I do, but I think that was about the time that he kind of came on the scene. They won a lot of awards, I guess. And so he kind of initiated this idea of people campaigning. So that, I don't remember having any pressure about that or feeling obligated to do something because of that. And I'm really glad I had that experience because it's kind of gone so far in this other direction that I find it very uncomfortable.
Yeah, it existed before, but almost up to the nominee. You know, there's that great story. George Kennedy for Cool Hand Luke took out a full-page ad in Variety, right? You know, like it was studio, didn't do it. George Kennedy did. And you're right
Wow.
and you're right about Weinstein and the list of things that he has made worse in this industry. And this one is pretty far down, but and where it exploded was in Shakespeare in Love, competing against Saving Private Ryan, which obviously should have won in my mind. It was just one of the great war films of all time. And Steven Spielberg, thinking as you did, he saw it happening and he was incredibly reticent to participate in it because it felt ugly. It felt.
So what year was that? Remind me.
That was 98. And that's not to say that Weinstein had never done a campaign prior to that, but it amped up a significant level. They sent, if I have the story correct, they sent televisions to members of the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, like brand new giant TVs, you know, which we call bribery. So, you know, and Spielberg was like, no, I'm not gonna play this. I made a good film, and I'm a film I'm proud of, and I'm not gonna lobby people for votes.
Yeah.
And then of course, and then he lost. I mean, not that it's crazy. It's like the Super Bowl. You got to the Super Bowl. It's not really losing, but we inevitably that's how we look at it.
Yeah.
So again, you sort of read, and many people, I guess you just said it once, but it gets repeated in many articles. Then so you got pregnant, hence the potato salad and the pickles, I'm guessing. And then there's. But you didn't really have much hesitation in taking a break from your career to have your children. In what the phrase that is used, or the sentence that is used from you is, "There's chaos in my house, and I love it."
Yeah, well, anyone who has children, I think, if they're honest, well, there's a certain amount of chaos, but I always wanted to have kids ever since I was little myself. So that was something that was so clear in my mind. Of course, I didn't know what it was really going to be like. And I had to do all the learning that everybody does when you become a parent. But no, I really wanted to do that very much. And I'm so grateful that I did. And I'm grateful I did it when I did it, because then I was able to have a bunch, which I really wanted to have. And now that they've all moved out, it's easier to just say, yes, that was, you know, make it sound easy. It was not. Of course, it never is. But I enjoyed that. And I also really being able to just step away from public life and work for a while with babies and all of that was incredibly helpful to me. And I'm glad I did it. It was you know, at times a lot to handle, but I'm glad I did it that way, because I think it made me much more sane. You know, it's true of all of us, right? If our lives are just about ourselves, it can, I think ultimately it's not very interesting.
Yeah, and you don't quite know when it's become too much about yourself. You get so set in your ways of taking care of yourself that I think you don't even recognize the shell that you've formed around yourself. That's the danger.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some movies that you made after The Grifters, and obviously 1991 was a significant year for you. But before we get to the big one, I want to actually briefly talk about the two others. First of all, I really liked Guilty by Suspicion, and maybe because it's one of the few movies that took on such an important issue, and an issue that Hollywood has been hesitant to. This is an embarrassing time for Hollywood. I mean, the government was worse, but Hollywood was a collaborator in the Black.
That's right. That's right.
And you worked with De Niro, a film directed by Irwin Winkler, and again, it's really worth seeing, especially if you care about the Blacklist.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that we need another movie about that subject. Yes. We need to have more about that subject, and I feel like we need to educate the next generation about what actually happened in Hollywood, and as you say, how corrupt Hollywood was, and how involved in the whole effort of the Un-American Activities Committee that they were. So there's a lot of great history there. I know one of my favorite ways to focus on it is Arthur Miller and what happened to him. which is a great story. He tells beautifully in his book, in his own autobiography, when one of my favorite parts is he was divorcing his first wife. He goes to Nevada to get his divorce. And in those days you had to go and stay and live there for, I don't know, 5 or 6 weeks. So he was there out in the desert in this kind of area being helped by a man who kind of did this for other guys. And the only other person he was around was Saul Bellow. So the two of them are out there trying to get their divorces. He goes into the courthouse to do the papers and get it all taken care of. And he sees across the way the guy from the House Un-American Activities Committee, who was well known as the person who served the subpoenas. So he sees the guy over there. He realizes it's his turn. He finishes his business. He goes over to the guy serves in the subpoena, and he sits down and has a drink with the guy and just talks to him. He wasn't at all surprised. And in fact, it did happen that the head of the committee said that he would let Miller go and not have to testify if he could get a picture with Marilyn Monroe. That actually did happen.
It just gives you.
And Miller said no.
Of course, Miller said no. There's no way Arthur Miller would agree to that. And it just gives you an idea of how unserious it was in reality. Serious in the effect it had on people, but this was not a serious investigation. Obviously, if you think someone is a threat to the United States of America, you don't ignore it to get a picture with his famous wife. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And his relationship with Kazan was so fascinating. And of course, Kazan had a totally different experience, handled it in a completely different way. But that was, yeah, there's so many fascinating, important stories inside of that long event. And since there's so much talk about Roy Cohn these days because of Trump,
Sure.
There's a lot of good history there. And there's a couple of documentaries about Roy Cohn. You might have seen them. They're streaming, and they talk about the committee, of course.
Yeah, last thing on that, at least from me, is this notion that might, look, putting these people in a position where they had to either turn in their friends or give up their own careers is a terrible spot. Those people are not the villains. The House Committee on Un-American Activities and the Hollywood executives who were complicit in it and afraid to stand up, those are the bad guys. But if you did go forward and turn in your friends, like Kazan did, I feel like you ought to have the decency to feel some shame afterwards. And that's for whatever reason, maybe that's just me, but that's what gets me angry. Sterling Hayden was tortured by it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That makes me forgive him to the extent that I have any business forgiving him. But does that make sense to you?
Totally. And he was such a great actor. And yeah, he was tortured by it. Warren, my husband, has a great, you should ask him when you see him. He has a great story about Kazan and asking Kazan about testifying against his friends. And because they were doing, when they were doing their film, when Warren was very young, he asked Kazan about that. And there's a great story there too. I think Kazan was tortured. I think I don't know if that's the right word, but I don't think it was an easy thing for him that he made the choice that he did.
Yeah, it reads like the effort to explain it away was like he was trying to sell himself on it all the time, trying to convince.
Exactly. Yes.
So before we get to Bugsy, I don't know I'm curious how many people say to you ever, "I know a great blowfish place," because that's what we've met I think once or twice, but it wasn't the right time. But really, that's what I want to say. And I rewatched it this morning, and it made me cry again. This is regarding Henry with you and Harrison Ford. And I got to tell you, I don't know what critics said. I love every single second of that movie.
Oh, thank you, Mike Nichols.
Well, yeah, you look, and I'd forgotten that part. And by the way, J.J. Abrams wrote the screenplay.
JJ, he was the kid. That's what Mike called him, the kid.
Yeah, it's crazy
because he was a kid. I think he was, I don't know how old he was, but he was really young.
Yeah, he had to be young. It was 1991. I mean, he looks like he's 30 today. But I noticed that he played in the movie as a small character, and it's just listed in the credits as delivery boy. So if you're young enough to play delivery boy and you wrote the screenplay, it's pretty impressive. But anyway.
And he's good. He's good in the scene. He's like chews gum. He's got his baseball hat, I think, backwards.
That's right.
Yeah. He's good in the scene.
It's just a really moving movie, and again, your performance is so layered. I mean, you are the sort of emotional soul of that movie. Harrison Ford is terrific, but he has sort of these two extremes to play, right? This sort of cutthroat lawyer who ignores his family, and then this guy finding himself. He's terrific in it, but there's this sort of, you are off balance the entire movie because you don't quite know what's happening. And again, it's why what I said at the beginning is true about one of the real great actors working today. So then Bugsy, and if there's a breakout film, The Grifters, then Bugsy sort of elevates things for you, in addition to it being such a fine movie.
Bugsy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that movie, actually. I saw it, I don't know, a few years ago. I don't remember exactly how long, but I sat and watched it and thought it has the most incredible combination of sort of class and elegance and ugly violence. It has this incredible combination of those things. It's incredibly well written. James Toback wrote it. Barry Levinson directed it. My husband produced and starred. And the three of them, the combination of those three men working on it, I think is kind of what gave it that complexity, because they're all so different from each other, but they really enjoy each other and they're all still friends. So, yeah.
I was, we did a podcast TCM did with Peter Bogdanovich this year, our first podcast, which was really good. And we sort of his arc, which is so complicated and early success and then a embarrassing fall as the town turned against him, probably understandably, and then this horrible tragedy, and then sort of an attempt to, and now sort of to many young directors seen as sort of a father figure. And Peter's very honest about himself. But he used a word mostly that applies to actresses when you need that kind of role. Certainly, by the way, we'll get to in a bit, a word that applies to Gloria Graham, who you played. But it applies to me to Bugsy, and the word is threat. There has to be some threat, this sort of, lurking sense that you don't know what's going to happen, but you sense that it could be awful. And I think Bugsy has that. Well, also, to me, it's like a history lesson.
Yeah, there is a kind of ominous quality about it. There is a threat hanging over it. I agree. Yeah, that's true. It's beautiful. It's beautiful in that way. And I mean, the production of it, I guess we don't get to see too many movies that are produced on that level these days, with that kind of cinematography and design and all of the elements around the characters. That was so lavish and so well thought out and so serious and gorgeous. And
if I'm ever asked, and I'm the wrong person to ask, but what have people not? What is the thing most understood about this town and about this business? And I only talk about it. I'm not really in it. But I always think, because it's true for me, even in the production we have for TCM, which has been absent now for the last 7 months, is that it's collaborative. And it's not kind of collaborative, and that's not a way for a famous actor to say something kind. I mean, you just described it. The production design, the cinematography, the set design, the lighting. I mean, these are all unbelievably talented artists. Eddie Muller, who hosts Noir Alley on TCM, he does something in his scripts that I now do. He no longer will say, Warren Beatty's Reds, because it makes it seem like it's only his movie. Red's probably a bad example because that's as close you can come to somebody throughout the whole movie. Wrote, produced, directed, starred. And so let's pick another one. But anyway, that like that you can say written, produced, directed, and starring Warren Beatty, but the notion that the director owns the movie leaves out all these incredibly talented artists that make it work, and that's what I think I want people to know, and that's what you just described with Bugs.
Yeah, that collaboration and the costumes also. Albert Wolski on that one. Oh, I think he won the Academy Award for that, and the costumes were so incredibly important. And it's interesting too, because all of those, the cinematographer, the costume designer, the production designer, the great ones always point away from themselves. They point away from themselves and at the story, just like good actors do. They're pointing away from their own thing and into the story. And that's true of Bugsy.
So the only question that I was curious about regarding your personal life, which I'm not terribly, I'm not interested, but I'm interested because I like you, but I'm not interested. So is that it is a unique experience to be an actor still fairly early, at least in your movie career, and then fall in love with someone who is so famous, who you've known, whose movies you saw when you thought, I'm never going to meet this person. You probably saw Splendor in the Grass, right? At some point, you're like, wow, that guy's really good at it. And then all of a sudden, that person is in front of you, and now you guys have been together 28 years. That has always, struck me when there are matches like this, or is it just instantly he becomes this regular guy when you're in front of him and working with him?
It's interesting because in looking back, it seemed very natural what happened between us, and even though he was a famous person, very quickly that just wasn't really what it was about. It was about something personal. And I have to say, I had a lot of respect for him. I thought Reds was a masterpiece, and I knew that when I met him, but he wasn't someone that I had thought a lot about. And at that point too, I was meeting famous people. I had done a couple of movies with De Niro, Harrison Ford. So I was beginning to feel like, oh, I see, this is what happens. And there's always a duality between what the person maybe you think they might be like and what they're like in real life. And there's all of that. So then it just becomes the work. Once again, you're just focused on, you're trying to do the work, which is what I was doing. And then this other thing happened. And so then it was, became this other experience. But what was happening really wasn't about anything about the exterior part of it. It was really what was going on between us that ended up being important in terms of, how we got together and why we ended up getting married and all of that.
28 years later and 4 children, and a chaotic, wonderfully chaotic house. So I am curious, the 7 years you spent in Kansas. And by the way, Johnny Carson is in my notes because when I saw you were from Kansas, so I spent way too much time sort of listing famous actors from Kansas, because I was like, there's not going to be anybody from Kansas. And so many people are from Nebraska, where Johnny Carson is from. Brando and Fred Astaire and Henry Fonda are all from Nebraska, but Kansas hangs in there. And what's interesting is that Fatty Arbuckle and Buster Keaton are from Kansas and Harold Lloyd is from Nebraska. I don't actually know if that's interesting, but I thought it seemed interesting to me. Montgomery, Nebraska too. But you got Hattie McDaniel, you got Dennis Hopper, obviously in you, and then some Oscar Micheaux, great silent director, but a lot of silent stars. Louise Brooks are from the plains.
Yeah, well, I can say, because I'm from Kansas, it is the most boring state in the country. And I'm about to help try to get out the vote in Kansas. So that's not meant in a pejorative way. I think it's just, although, I left when I was 7, so maybe I missed all the kind of the jazzier parts. but it is so flat. It's incredibly flat, and that's kind of beautiful.
Yeah.
Because when you look out on the horizon, there's nothing blocking you. It's
Right.
just flat and very windy.
No, I've, driven across country a couple times, and, when you go through Kansas, you're like, all right, here we go. This is,
Yes.
right. What you see here is what you're going to see in 278 miles.
Right, but I do remember it, and I remember, in fact, I drove through a couple of times as well, and yeah, I mean, I remember it. I remember our backyard, and there were no fences, and we all kind of ran around in our little neighborhood very safely, going from house to house. I went to Pearl Kinsler Elementary School. I loved my teachers. I had a best friend named Martha Dreer. So it was I was really happy there, really happy chapter.
If anything, is a memory from Kansas, but then certainly in San Diego. Do you remember? Did you love movies? What did you see? What excited you?
The extent of my movie education was Peter Pan, The Odd Couple.
Oh, right, sure.
Sound of Music. That might be it until I was a young adult. So maybe that's why I didn't dream about becoming a movie actor, because I actually knew nothing about movies, except I remember seeing Persona for the first time when I was probably 18 or 19 and thinking, oh, wait a minute.
No, there's something happening here. So how do you care when a movie either doesn't do well or is critically panned? I mean, I figure you have to care. You invest time and energy and work in it. How do you handle that, or is it easy to shrug off for you?
I care because generally I've gotten to know the other people, the producers, and the people that have the real stake in whether the movie ends up having a life or not. So I do care, but I also feel like it's the work. I put it out there, and then, I'm gone. They make the movie, they're editing the movie, they're living with the movie. And so because I do things because I believe in them and I love them, I do want people to see them. But if they don't, I mean, I've made films I absolutely adore and I think are really great movies and important, but that very few people have seen. So that happens too. But when something is, I feel like I made a movie called The Report, which is about, the clandestine torture program that we had as Americans after 9/11. Like, I wanted people to see that because of what it says about our history. But I'm pretty, I just keep going and I do my thing, I do my work. And if something, it doesn't change my life that much. If something is considered to be successful. If I happen to read something that's very negative, I generally just ignore it. Reviews, I try to avoid them. But if something, if I happen to see something that's very negative, I'm so hurt. I hate it. I feel terrible, and I believe it.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. Human nature is puzzling because, of course, you've gotten rave reviews. I mean, the things I say about you are shared by many. You got that. Twitter for a while was a sort of a nice place because you had people who chose to follow you theoretically because they liked you and they had a nice sensibility, good sense of humor. They liked what you do. Obviously, for me, they love these classic movies that I'm fortunate enough to stick my head in front of for a couple of minutes before it starts. But, I don't know, I'll get 138 nice things. And then if someone says, why do you always look down to your left? You should look down at the right. It feels like it's a function, something you need. And I mean, the whole day, I'm like, God, why do I look to my left? Like, what's that about? What's wrong with me? I can't look to my right. Yeah.
I think it's human nature. I think, and I think certainly as a public person like you are and like I am, that if we don't have some sense of our vulnerability, there's something wrong. If we don't, I mean, and I know I'm always nervous when I work. I always have a sense of, can I, it's a search. It's a search. It's an active search, and you never really know until you're actually there doing it. And you don't even know then. You're just in this sort of state of uncertainty, which you have to tolerate and cultivate in a certain way as an actor. So that I've gotten a bit more used to, but it doesn't ever change. One is always living with that sense of being on edge.
You mentioned the report Adam Driver you share the cast with, and you played Senator Dianne Feinstein. And I saw that in Telluride, and I liked it quite a bit. And it was one of those movies that very clearly is important. You haven't played a lot of real people. Is that a different? Well, I mean, some of them, but real famous people. Does that? Do you meet with her? Do you talk to her? I mean, obviously, there's plenty of tape available, but you probably knew her anyway, because for crying out loud.
I had met her because I went to San Francisco State, and we had an alumni celebration thing up in San Francisco. And she had gone to San Francisco State, so we had met. And but you're right, there was so much to watch. And because of the nature of the movie, I didn't want to call her and sort of feel like she was kind of giving us the okay. We wanted to be able to make the movie free of what anybody who was being depicted felt. So I didn't talk to her about it beforehand, but I just watched her and listened to her endlessly to try to get enough of a sense of her without it being an impersonation, but just kind of enough where you believe that it was her. But she called me afterwards. She liked it.
Oh, that's good to know. Yeah. No,
yeah. I know.
Yeah, it's funny. David Fincher, it'll be out soon on Netflix, is making a movie that's unbelievably called Mank, and it's about my grandfather in the process of writing Citizen Kane. And Gary Oldman plays Herman, and he's in every scene. But so I get asked a lot. I saw it, and I think it's wonderful. But I get asked, did they consult you, like or the family, not me, And and I think to what you're saying, like, no. What does he want? Our input? All our input is going to affect his creative process. Like, he got an idea. He wanted us to see it. It's interesting. He was eager for the film to be seen, but he didn't want any input at all. And I completely understand that. I think it would have been strange.
Yeah. I think in this case we felt the same way, and there was so much rich information that was firsthand. That we wanted to use, and we felt we were being true to what actually happened, because that's what we wanted to do. We didn't want to skew it, because Dan Jones, who Adam Driver played, helped us with the film. So he was really there, so he could tell me and I could ask him. He was on the set, so I could say to him, so how was it in this moment or that moment? What did she do? How did she respond? And so that was, we had that, and he's a very thoughtful, smart guy, very generous, and so I had that as a reference.
So what I like is that this small movie, or what, I don't know how small it was, but as you say, you wish more people had seen it. You have a fair number of really good roles in some small movies, but the report comes out in 2019, and then one of the other movies you have in 2019 is Captain Marvel, and hard to imagine two more different roles, two more different characters. I have not seen Captain Marvel. I gave up on the superhero movies, but some of them are great, but they're not really for me. But I'm just curious, because there almost seems like no actor who you would imagine less likely to appear in a Marvel superhero movie than Annette Bening.
Oh, I loved it. I had a great time. They were making the film when they called me up, and they had to explain to me who I was.
I'm sure, yeah.
Because I didn't really understand the comic book, all the givens of the world. And I also had to consult my children, although that was in secret because I was sworn to secrecy. But still, I had to understand it. Because, you know, like the good guys, the bad guys, and they were also trying to subvert that in a way so that if you really got confused, if you didn't understand the givens. So after they explained it to me and my kids explained it to me, then I thought, oh, okay, now, no. And I also got to play two parts.
Right.
So that was so fun. Are you kidding? It was so fun. I got to die in the dirt, and I got to dance a little bit, and yeah, no, I was really, I felt very lucky to be in it. These productions are so massive. It's just fascinating from that point of view, just walking onto the lot. And I asked the PA that was helping me, I said, so how many sound stages are you guys using? Because they were already in production. And he began to count on one hand, and then he ran out. That's a lot of sound stages. And then when we actually were shooting, we went away and shot at a lake, and then we were at Edwards Air Force Base, and it was massive, and that was fun.
And then you know, I don't know, has it gone over $1 billion? I don't know, 700-800 million. It's the highest grossing, I think, the highest grossing female-led film ever, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think all of them sort
Wonder
of are
Woman.
like that, aren't they? All those movies, they all all the Marvel movies are.
Right, but it does go to the notion that, you know, you can have a woman lead. I mean, Meryl Streep's movies have made more money than anybody else's movies, and yet still for a long time there was this idea in Hollywood that, like, well, obviously a woman can be in the cast, but they can't lead the cast. That's crazy.
Well, I think that's changing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. Clearly.
But also, you probably know well that in the old, you know, in a lot of the old movies, there was a period when women were really leading the charge, weren't they? In a lot of the movies back in the studio days.
No question. Sure, but Betty Davis and, you know, Joan Crawford and so many, you know, Betty Grable and Marilyn. There's a time when they headlined movies. They still weren't generally getting paid the same, but where they suffered the most, of course, was in the supporting parts, which, you know, would have a minimal depth, and when they were largely there to support the lead character or undermine the lead character. But as you talked about, you know, having agency in your career, those characters had very little agency, right?
Yes, and I think don't you think it's changing now? I really do see a change in the writing and in the directing, and just the way that the nuance that is written into female characters now. There's just so much more nuance, and there's so many more women writing and directing, and so I think that has an influence on it as well. So there's just a lot of those stereotypes are going away.
No question, and long overdue, of course. But as I was, you know, going through your filmography, your resume, as we get closer to today, the number of the movies that you have done that have a female director increases. Like is that something do you ever look for that? I'm thinking about The Kids Are All Right and Lisa Cholodenko, but there are more after that, some in co-directing parts, including Marvel, right? So is that, do you seek that out? I take it pleases you, but is that something that you like to do?
Oh, if that is, yeah, I mean, I love that idea. But it's always the writing. I mean, for me, I always start with the writing, whatever is on the page first, and then the director. Lisa co-wrote Kids Are All Right and then directed it herself. So yeah, and that couldn't have been done by anybody else but her. So, I mean, it's a good thing when I find that. It's not like I just look for that. Although now that I'm watching so much stuff, I mean, I'm trying to keep up. There's so much stuff, right? It's like you get paralyzed with opportunity. There's so many good things to watch, but I notice so much of the interesting material now that's streaming is written and directed by women.
Yeah, there's the television, or what passes for television now. I mean that positively. I mean, I don't know what to call it. series that are
Right.
streaming that you watch at home on your television. I don't know if they, yes, so many of them are led by women. So I want to get a little bit to the thing that you do that I think makes you as your career, not personally, but so the one I think of because of how much I love it, I think of the scene where Harrison Ford says, "I know a great blowfish place," and the breakdown that you have at that moment as you've been wondering where he is and what kind of life, if any life, you're going to have with this man who's changed so dramatically. And then, of course, American Beauty, this unbelievably powerful moment of you having a 29-second breakdown and moving out and walking toward the camera and off screen. And then in a movie like The Kids Are All Right, where there is just this, there is no moment of tremendous excess or disappearance, but there are like seemingly to me 10, 15, 20 levels of 20 layers and of different emotions, different ideas, frequently without saying a word. Come easily to you? Do you just imagine that character? Does that get summoned from somewhere? It must get summoned from someplace inside you, right?
It doesn't come easy. Of course, I hope in the moment it doesn't look like it should just look like it's happening, and it shouldn't look like it's hard. But no, it takes a lot of thought for me. And I always have to kind of bolster myself because I get very nervous and I have to find my way into it. But I know good writing when I see it. And I remember the scene that you mentioned in American Beauty. I remember when I read the script for the first time and I thought, oh, that's a good scene. And in some ways, you have to sort of forget about it in a way. There's a part of you, of course, that doesn't forget about it, that knows that you're going to do it. Because it's one thing to imagine it, and it's one thing to see it on the page, and then it's another thing to be in the moment that you're doing it. Because in the moment that you're doing it, you're also living your life, and you have whatever's going on in your life, and you have the time of day at which you're shooting, and what all the circumstances are around you. And having done it enough to know that there's a moment when everybody else, except the people that are operating the camera and the people that are doing the sound, everybody else stops and they say, quiet, 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 go. And that is scary.
It's scary merely to hear you say it. Let's take that scene, that American Beauty scene, which is like, I don't know, I always imagine myself capable of telling people more than the things I know. But like, I imagine I'm teaching in a class in acting, and I'm like, here's this is, if you can get within 80% of this, you've made it, right? You'll never do it. But so is that what happens after that scene? Do you do it once? Do you have to do it again? Does Sam Mendes say, it was pretty good, or, or whatever, the light wasn't right, or?
Yeah, we actually had to, that was when we had to reshoot, because we shot it once, and Conrad Hall, who was the cinematographer, who was a great cinematographer, he was legendary, respected. Yeah. He was older by that point too. I'd made one movie with him, but Sam Mendes had never directed a film, and he had a lot of different interesting people that wanted to do the film. And he called me and asked me, so what do you think about Conrad Hall? I was like, oh my God, he's a genius. Are you kidding? If you can get him, great. He hires Conrad, and Conrad called me and said, Annette, I got it. I got it, meaning I got the movie. Oh my God, I mean, what a lovable man.
Right.
And he was operating the camera when we shot that scene. And then we, I remember the street we were on. I remember what time of day it was. I remember, trying to get my head into the right place. And then I saw, I don't know, a couple weeks later, it was not that long later, a week or two, I saw it on the call sheet, the same scene. Oh. And I was like, I can remember where I was when I saw the call sheet. I was in my bedroom, it was on my nightstand, and I was like, wait, this is on this call sheet. how is that possible? And I called Sam. I said, my God, it's here again. He said, yeah, it was too dark. We couldn't see you. And because Conrad, of course, he's the master of that. He's the master of making things dark and giving things this incredible atmosphere. So it was so scary. I had to do it again. Of course, in the theater, we do that all the time. But when you do it in the movies, you think, okay, oh, wow, okay, that's done. Got it,
that's
done.
You know what? I've never thought of that in my life. That, of course, if you have some breakdown scene, some particularly emotional scene that requires this well of intensity, right? You do it 6 times a week, right? Or 8 times a week, whatever it is
It's 8, yeah.
8, yeah. And yet I think, oh my God, you can't ask this woman to deliver that performance.
Well, it's funny because really, when I think about it, it's more having to, how can I say this? It's the fear that is scary. It's not, you know what I'm saying? It's, can I do it again? That's the thing, is can I find that? And can I find the right, you know, the right amount of whatever that is?
Well, you found it. It's a Wonderful Life is a famous story about in the scene in the bar where Jimmy Stewart breaks down, and he had very clearly, you know, he'd served in the war and risked his life and flown all these bombing missions over enemy territory. Been in imminent danger of death for him and his crew on a regular basis. It's the first movie he makes after the war. He breaks down in this moment during It's a Wonderful Life, which was not really in the script for him necessarily to do that. It's supposed to be an emotional scene, and Frank Capra comes up afterwards, and he had not gotten a close-up because he didn't know it was coming. So he asked him to do it again, if he could do it again. And Stewart, as you know, great as he was, and as, you know, likable as he was, and eager to please, said, I don't think so. And so they fixed it in editing, and they invented some editing techniques that allowed you to see a close-up, but you'll notice that it's a speck grainier.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know it until recently either, but it's but to me, then that told me that, like, no, you can't. And of course, he had a theater background. He'd done stuff night after night after night. But it must be difficult. I mean, and I don't suggest that you have it easy, but to find that moment, and in front, you're not doing it so much in front of an audience. You're really doing it in front of your, as you say, a director of photography and a director and the lighting guy, the people who were there, which is always scarier to me than the audience, right? The other professionals.
No, they're not really. No. Usually there's what I mean is that's usually a very inviting atmosphere. The cinematographer and everyone in the room with you. I generally feel like everyone's really pulling for you. And, you know, sometimes, as I'm sure you know, maybe your audience would like to hear, sometimes when you're going to do something like this Jimmy Stewart scene, of course, they didn't know he was going to do what he did. So it ended up being kind of this magical thing that just happened because Stewart did it. Sometimes if you know in advance that something is going to be very emotional, they'll shoot close-ups first.
Oh, yeah, right. That makes sense.
If they can, they get 2 cameras and they have one that's a bit further. And, you know, they do the wider shot and the close-up at the same time. Usually they can't do that because of other people in the scene and all that stuff, but sometimes they can.
Before I finish up with you, I want to make sure that I talk about An American President, which is a movie that so many people love, and I guess that was. But again, we talk about writers, Aaron Sorkin and his manner of doing dialogue. I don't recall whether American President had it on. It strikes me that it wasn't Aaron Sorkin at 10. It was like at 8. Does that pose a unique type of challenge, or is it merely interesting to be able to do things in an old school Leo McCarey like banter?
Well, he's got that in his writing, doesn't it? He's always got somebody who then decides that they've got the thing to say, and then they say it so well, and they go on a little bit longer than normal people do.
Yes.
It's good writing. No, I love it. And Sorkin is so good at that, and he hadn't done a lot of movies, of course, at that point. He had done his own play, but I don't think he'd done anything else. So if he'd done A Few Good Men, but so it was great. It was great challenge and great fun, and yeah, it was very satisfying to work on that, because there's always a kind of moral fortitude in his writing, isn't there? And there's that kind of wanting to just say it really, really well. And he has people say things very, very well. So it's fun to do.
Yeah, when he's at his best, you get a sense that I don't know. There's that there's an idea that you're headed toward some sense of justice, right? And hard, whether it's on a small scale or an American president's a slightly bigger scale, but that you're going to end up at the end, pumping your fist, even if it's a little, sometimes, as you say, when it's even a little over the top, it's you do that, like, okay, that was good.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's very satisfying.
That's right, satisfying.
As an audience, it's very satisfying to see. Yes, that's exactly right. That's how I would have said it if I was Aaron Sorkin.
Right, if I had 1/10 the talent of Aaron Sorkin. It's hard for movies to deliver the ending, and this is slightly different, but it reminds me of it. Hard for movies to deliver the ending you want without the audience feeling manipulated, or getting there was inauthentic or corny.
That's right.
That's why I love Shawshank Redemption, because it gives you the ending you wanted, which might not have been realistic, yet somehow, no, that feels perfect. That if it ended any other way, it would have diminished the experience that I just had.
Yes, where it feels emotionally true and it feels like the right thing, and they've earned it.
That's right. I guess you gotta earn it. So, you hear, I have you quoted as saying, "I don't want to be a different age than I am." Is that in life, or is that in I presume that to mean in the characters you play, but or does that hold true all the way through for Annette?
I'm not sure what I was talking about. I was probably talking about life. I was probably saying that I want to be the age that I am. In other words, I don't want to try to be younger than I am, is probably what I meant. Just because there's so much talk about that with actresses and aging and all of that. So yeah, it's satisfying and interesting creatively to try to get at approximately, where you are in your life and what you're going through, the time that you're going through. That is interesting to try to communicate.
This period that you're in personally now, with the kids out of the house and the chaos reduced, and the ability to not have restrictions on your work when you feel like working, is this a more satisfying place to be, or a differently satisfying place to be? I don't mean in comparison to your kids. I just mean career while the kids are there, and now this freedom you have after.
Yeah, I'm still adjusting to it. I did a couple of projects last year that, where I wasn't traveling with any of my kids, and that I wasn't trying to, balance the different things that were going on. And it was quite remarkable. It's still very new to me. And of course now, because of COVID, I'm not doing anything, and I'm just at home with my husband. So it's very quiet. And I'm kind of liking it. It's always bittersweet, and we miss them, but they're still around, and a couple live here in LA, and we see our kids a lot. Although with COVID, we haven't been seeing the ones that live far apart from us. But no, work-wise, yeah, it's quite remarkable and quite different than it was for so many years. So now being able to just only do that when I'm working, it's refreshing. I'm enjoying it.
As a host at Turner Classic Movies, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool, which is a movie I loved. And you talk about, I mean, I've mentioned it before, you talk about an actress with threat. That's Gloria Graham, who you never trust just about in any movie, but desperately want her to approve of right? You know, desperately want her to get your jokes, right? To think you're cool. And you capture this really interesting time in her life, although I get the feeling all the times in Gloria Graham's life were pretty interesting. Did you know much about her when you took the role?
Yeah, I had thought a lot about it because Barbara Broccoli, who was one of the producers, had approached me many years ago about possibly doing it. So I had thought a lot about Gloria. I had also studied her a lot. When I was doing The Grifters, I studied Gloria because Stephen Frears, the director, had suggested that I check her out and kind of, and of course, the genre that she was known for was sort of the genre that The Grifters was trying to be in. So she was a femme fatale from that. The character that I played in The Grifters was sort of a femme fatale. So yeah, and then this book that a boyfriend of hers wrote called Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool, about his own experience having met her and they were lovers for a number of years, and they had this very intense relationship, and then they had broken up and she suddenly appeared back in his life. That's what the movie's about, and about how his family took her in, his family from Liverpool. Amazing. And he's an amazing man. And so I went as far as I could into her. And there's actually not a lot of really reputable stuff about Gloria. That the stuff is, a lot of it is very sensational about her life. She did have a pretty amazing life in many ways.
And she did have one sensational moment that I get why people focus on it, but then they do.
And what would that be? What would that be, Ben?
When you marry your stepson, it's generally going to make the papers.
She did. She did, in fact, do that. Yeah. But people that knew her and people that were friendly with her and around her, there were quite a few people that she met when she moved back to New York, and when she went back to studying and everything, that it spoke so fondly of her. And she was really loved, but she was a badass, and she lived her own life in the way that she wanted to. And I love that about her.
Yeah, it's hard not to like her, and everything I've read about her or heard people really talking about her is the same thing, that she was adored. So you're not done working, obviously, and the Death on the Nile is headed our way at some point in some form. I think later this year. So that this is what, you go back to the 1930s and Grand Hotel. This is an all-star cast, which happened a lot in the 70s too. What brought you to this? Again, and I'm not trying to typecast you, because you have done all kinds of movies, but the more I look, I keep thinking of you as this actor, right? In these sort of small, but this has got to be fun, just like the Marvel movie. That this has to be a blast, Death on the Nile.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for saying that. That's such a kind thing to say. It's a real compliment. So Ken Branagh is directing it. So I know that, first of all. And they send me a script, and it's Death on the Nile, but they've changed Death on the Nile. He and his screenwriter, who happens to be American, Michael Green. And so it's the 1930s, it's Death on the Nile, but there's all these other elements to it that they have woven into this murder mystery, including, excuse me, my character. So it was just beyond fun, complete blast. And talk about beautiful. Oh my God.
Where were you?
Sorry?
Where were you when you?
We were in England, but they surrounded us with the illusion of being in Egypt. We couldn't actually shoot in Egypt. We weren't able to. But it's the most gorgeous boat that they built and that we shot on. And I have to say, I mean, this was the craftsmanship and the design of the world around us was so gorgeous. And yeah, we did have a hell of a lot of fun as a cast. I certainly did. It was such a gift. And Ken is everything everyone says he is. He's a truly phenomenal director, but as an actor, what he can do as an actor is truly phenomenal. I've also seen him on the stage, and he's also incredible. But anyway, so yeah, no, it was this ensemble of being able to just, because of course most of the time we were all together in the scene, so we spent a lot of time together, and that was a joy for me.
You know, you fly in the face of what I'm about to say, and obviously so many Americans do. But what do the English have over us? Why are there so many good English actors? I mean, they come over here. It's not like we don't have American actors, but there's a reason why, you know, Star Wars reboots with these two great English stars, and they're just. And I guess they take it more seriously when they're young. Like, you know, they value the arts a little more than we do, at least from the.
Well, I think they have this long tradition too, that because they're such a, you know, they just have so many more centuries of history under their belts in terms of the theater, and their training does have a kind of weight to it and a great history to it. But so there is that, but we also have great training here, and I love that about our country. And it used to be that there was this sort of cliche that American actors work from the inside out, meaning they start with the guts and they start with the inner workings, and then they work out towards the exterior. And that English actors do the opposite. They figure out the hat and the mustache and the walk and the voice, and then they work inwards. And of course, neither of those is completely true. We both do both. But there's certainly, because of their culture, the theater is much more imbued with day-to-day life there. And they have many more theaters all over the country, and they have a tradition of the theater. So a lot of their people train and then move into the theater and then go back and forth between television, film, theater, and that's just much more accepted as a way of life. Here, there's a lot of that here, but it's slightly different. There aren't as many people that go back and forth and do both. So that's part of it.
I'm going to definitely let you go, but I'm curious because I heard probably whenever he was doing American Sniper and Bradley Cooper was on the Howard Stern show, and obviously things have changed. Television has become, the writing on television is so good on these shows, and but there's still a little thing about if you're a movie star, you don't do television. Not at all the way it was in the 70s and 80s. But Howard Stern asked Bradley Cooper if he'd ever do TV, and Bradley Cooper's answer was, Tom Hardy does TV. Of course I do TV. And I was suddenly stunned by, wow, other actors really value Tom Hardy. Who's great, but I didn't. That's not who I expected him to say. So you do television, right? If the part was good, if it was a depth, yeah.
Yeah, I'm reading a lot of stuff, and when I find the right thing, if there's something, yeah, absolutely.
Last thing is that I noticed I'm not giving anything away here because all I've seen is the trailer to Death on the Nile, but your hair appears to be purple.
Really?
Yeah, it looks.
I think that's a misprint on your picture. I think it's red.
All right, fair enough. I mean, I had to freeze it, and because I was into it. I was like, Annette Bening has purple hair. But, all right, if it's not true, it's not true. Annette, thank you for taking the time to talk to everybody at the Virginia Film Festival and to talk to me. I really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for doing it with me, and I really enjoyed it. Great talking with you.
Yeah, and best to your husband. Thanks very much.
Thank you.